Did you know that one of Reddit's most infamous users shared a post titled, "I did heroin yesterday. Ask me anything," and it marked the beginning of his total collapse, documented for the entire internet to witness? What drives someone to try heroin not out of desperation, but out of boredom? Why would a man marry a fictional roach named Agatha, and feel genuinely betrayed when others didn't take it seriously? And how do you sit at a dinner table with your friends while serving them stir-fried human leg meat, your own? These aren't clickbait headlines or creepypasta. These are real Reddit users. Real threads. Real unravelings. This isn't a video about internet weirdos for laughs. It's about what happens when the deepest parts of the human psyche are let loose in a space with no identity, no consequence, and no help. Reddit is supposed to be a forum, but for some people, it became a confessional booth, a diary, a last scream into the void. In the next 65 minutes, we're going to dive deep into Reddit's most deranged stories, not the loudest or most shocking, but the quiet ones, the slow burns, the ones where people fall apart piece by piece, and leave every detail behind for us to read. Stick around until the end, because every thread we explore might feel like a freak show at first. But by the time it's over, you'll realize just how easy it is to become the next one. Have you ever said something out loud that you'd never say with your name attached to it? Something dark, something broken, something that, if anyone knew it was you, might change the way they look at you forever. Reddit is built for those moments. It doesn't ask for your real name. It doesn't care where you went to school or what you look like. It doesn't even want to know if you're telling the truth. It just listens. And in that silence, on an empty screen with nothing but a blinking cursor, people say the kinds of things they never even whisper in therapy. They confess. They unravel. They scream into the void hoping nobody responds, but praying someone does. On Facebook, people smile. On Instagram, they filter. On TikTok, they perform. But on Reddit, they bleed. There's something hypnotic about a blank username and an open thread. It's like standing behind a one-way mirror, completely exposed, yet unseen. That anonymity doesn't just free people. It seduces them. It tells them, you can say anything. No one will ever know. Go on. Let it out. And they do. Every day, thousands of people pour their secrets into subreddits like r off my chest, r confessions, r depression, r true off my chest. Some are silly, some are funny, but some are quiet detonations of pain. I stole painkillers from my dad's drawer and I don't think I can stop. I think I love my dog more than my wife. I pretend to be okay at work, but I spend my lunch breaks crying in my car. I want to disappear, but I don't want to hurt anyone by doing it. No punctuation, no polish, just raw thought, typed at 2 a.m., alone in the dark. That's not just a Reddit post. That's a scream muffled by digital silence. It's easy to judge these people, to call them weird, dramatic, attention-seeking, but sit with those words for a second. Read between the lines. Feel the shaking in their grammar, the pauses in their sentences, the desperation that seeps through every word. You'll see something terrifying. You'll see yourself. Because the truth is, Reddit isn't just a website. It's a mirror. And the people we label as deranged, unhinged, or insane, they're not as far from us as we think. Given the right pressures, the wrong night, and just enough loneliness, anyone can break. And on Reddit, when they do, they don't scream. They post. Which brings us to our first story. A story that started with a simple sentence. I did heroin yesterday. Ask me anything. What followed was one of the most haunting digital descents ever recorded. And it all happened in public. It began with boredom, not desperation, not a rough childhood, not some life-shattering trauma. Just boredom. He was 24, master's degree, good job, clean record, and one afternoon, while walking through Washington Square Park, he sat on a bench to check his phone. That's it. That's how the spiral began. A man next to him, a dealer, asked if he needed anything. At first, he thought maybe just some weed, something light, something nostalgic, but then the dealer offered heroin. And instead of walking away, he paused. He would later post about it on Reddit. I did heroin yesterday. Ask me anything. That single post would mark the beginning of one of Reddit's most disturbing public breakdowns. The username was Spontaneous Age. And over the course of days, weeks, and eventually years, he would use Reddit as a kind of mirror. A journal. A confession booth. His audience? Strangers. Some trying to help, some cheering him on, some laughing. In that first post, he didn't sound like someone in trouble. He was articulate, witty, curious. He wrote in long paragraphs, describing the high as a full-body orgasm times 10. He said he felt like he was floating, lucid, euphoric. He knew the risks, of course. He wasn't naive, but he also wasn't worried. He believed, and this is important, he believed he was in control. "I don't regret this at all," he wrote. It was a valuable life experience. But what he didn't realize was that heroin doesn't come with a warning label. It doesn't knock the door politely and wait for an invitation. It gets inside you, fast, and once it's in, it rewrites the rules. Just 2 weeks later, a new post appeared. "I've been using since. Shot up for the first time today. Ask me anything." And just like that, the voice changed. It wasn't witty anymore. It wasn't curious. Now it was shaking, tired, drenched in sweat and shame. "I'm still withdrawing, throwing up, sweating out gallons of sweat. Please help me before I relapse. I just want to die." What started as a social experiment had turned into a full collapse, and the world was watching. Commenters swarmed in. Some begged him to stop. Others mocked him. One user shared his own story, $500,000 lost. Multiple overdoses, track marks hidden beneath business suits. And in response, Spontaneous Age didn't argue. He just said, "My heart goes out to you." There's something eerie about reading a person's breakdown as it happens. There are no edits, no hindsight, just raw thoughts, typed out through shaking hands at 3 a.m. It's not a movie. It's not a podcast. It's real. And it's happening now. Over the next few posts, Spontaneous Age tried to fight back. He went to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. He flushed his needles. He said he felt hopeful. He said he had no cravings. But then, another post. "I finished my stash. Bad idea, but too late. I nodded off again. I took another hit at 4 a.m. For those of you calling this fake, do you want to see my track marks?" And he attached a photo. A blurry, underlit image, red pinpricks, swollen veins. It was proof, not just for Reddit, but maybe for himself. Because here's the thing. At this point, he wasn't just fighting addiction. He was fighting the narrative of addiction. People on Reddit began accusing him of being fake, of trolling, of writing fiction for karma. And that almost hurt more than the withdrawal. Because when you're addicted and alone, the worst thing that can happen is not being believed. In his next update, he lashed out. Not violently, not cruelly, just desperately. "I'm not proud of any of this. I posted here because I can't tell anyone in my life. I wanted to talk. I needed to know I'm not the only one." But even in his darkest moments, even as his posts turned chaotic and rambling and blurred by withdrawal, he never stopped typing. Even when his girlfriend left, even when he lost his job, even when he said, "I just want to die. I'm staying alive just to make it to another meeting." And then, silence. For nearly a year, the account went dark. People assumed the worst, that he had vanished, that he had overdosed, that his story, like so many others, had ended with a needle in his arm. But then, one final post, a flicker of light. "I tried heroin a month ago. Got addicted, started injecting, started Suboxone. Ask me anything." It didn't go viral. It didn't even get much attention. And then, another silence. A longer one. Years passed. Until, 7 years later, he returned. Just one message. "I don't know if anyone remembers me. But I'm 6 years clean. Life is good. I haven't been able to read my old posts. Maybe someday I will. But for now, thank you. To anyone who ever reached out. You helped me more than you know." And just like that, the mirror cracked, but didn't break. Because somehow, Spontaneous Age climbed back from the edge. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all. Not the drugs, not the collapse, but the reminder that anyone, even someone who sounds smart, stable, and completely fine, can fall apart right in front of you. And you might not even notice until it's too late. Now, that story might have shaken you. It should. But the next one? The next one doesn't spiral out slowly. It begins already broken. Let me tell you about the man who cooked and ate his own amputated leg. There's a moment, just before the fall, where things don't look broken yet. Where the cracks haven't spread. Where the person still smiles. Still types in full sentences. Still says they're fine. But deep down, they're waiting for someone to notice. And sometimes, the first place they go looking is Reddit. What starts as a confession can quickly become a performance. A post goes up, people reply, karma trickles in, comments multiply, and suddenly, someone who felt invisible all day is now being seen. Hearts, replies, upvotes, messages from strangers saying, "You're not alone." And it feels good. Not just good, addictive. That's the part we don't talk about enough. Not the drug, not the collapse, but the applause. The way validation becomes its own kind of narcotic. When Spontaneous Age made his first post, "I did heroin yesterday. Ask me anything," he got flooded with attention. Questions, praise, concern. Thousands of people suddenly tuned into his story. And for the first time in what might have been a very long time, he felt important. And isn't that what we all want? To matter, to be heard, to not feel like a ghost scrolling through other people's lives while no one notices ours. The internet doesn't just hear you. It reflects you. You say, "I'm in pain," and it says, "We're here for you." You say, "I made a mistake," and it says, "You're brave for sharing." You say, "I did heroin," and it says, "Ask me anything." And maybe at first, it is support, genuine, human, needed. But when that kind of feedback becomes your only form of connection, something quietly shifts. You don't just share for healing. You share for reaction. And suddenly, you're not recovering. You're performing recovery. You're documenting your spiral. You're feeding the crowd. And every time they clap, you sink a little deeper. It's subtle. It's dangerous. And worst of all, it feels like care. But care and attention aren't the same thing. The internet is fast at reacting, but slow at staying. People will rush in to upvote your heartbreak, but they won't sit with you in silence. They'll give you advice, but not accountability. They'll say, "Stay strong," and then never check in again. In the case of Spontaneous Age, his updates became a kind of mini-series. Each post drew more people in. The stakes rose, the confessions deepened, and somewhere along the way, between the lines and the likes and the AMAs, validation became the drug, and no one warned him it would run out. Because when the karma stopped, when the comments slowed, when Reddit moved on, he was still there, alone, addicted, and empty. That's the dangerous illusion of internet empathy. It feels endless, but it's borrowed, and once the audience leaves, so does the high. He started chasing that same feeling of being seen the same way he chased his next hit. Not just heroin, but human connection. Even if it came from strangers behind screens. The scariest part? He's not the only one. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of posts just like his. Some from people pretending everything's okay. Some from people saying goodbye. And some, like him, hoping their pain will echo just loud enough to bring someone back to the thread. But it's never enough. Because no amount of upvotes will hold your hand in withdrawal. No gold badge will fix what's bleeding beneath your skin. And no Reddit award will save your life. Which brings us to the next story. Because while Spontaneous Age turned to Reddit to share his fall, the next man, he didn't want applause. He just wanted dinner. And what he served was a piece of himself. There's a phrase that comes up a lot in stories like these. It usually shows up somewhere near the beginning, right after the confession. And just before things get worse. It goes something like this. "But I'm not addicted. I can stop anytime I want." Or this. "I've done the research. I know the risks." Or the most dangerous one of all. "I'm different." When Spontaneous Age made his second post, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a plan. He had just tried heroin. And now, he wanted to try cocaine too. Not as a junkie, not in desperation, but as an experiment. "I want to compare the two," he wrote. "See how heroin and cocaine differ in terms of effects and experience." As if he were writing a product review. To him, it wasn't about escape, it was about exploration, curiosity, self-discovery. He saw himself as rational, detached, controlled. That's the illusion. See, the most dangerous drug isn't heroin. It isn't cocaine. It's ego. It's the belief that your intelligence will somehow save you. That being informed will make you immune. That addiction is something that happens to other people, not you. Because you're smart, you're composed, you know your limits. But here's the thing, so did he. Spontaneous Age had a full-time job, a degree. He read the medical literature. He studied dosing. He was cautious. And none of that mattered. Because addiction doesn't care how smart you are. It only cares that you tried. And he did. First heroin, then cocaine, then heroin again, then needles. And with each step, he posted another update, still trying to sound in control, still framing it like a personal journey, even as his life was collapsing underneath him. And what's even more chilling, he wasn't alone in this mindset. Another user replied to his early posts with a haunting reflection. "You sound just like me when I started. Rational, in control, smart enough to analyze everything. I lost $500,000. I was a CEO. And I ended up stealing from my best friend just to get another fix." That's the problem with feeling in control. You don't notice when you're not. Because ego doesn't scream when it dies. It just fades quietly, and by the time you realize it's gone, the damage is already done. This illusion of control is especially common among high-functioning addicts. The ones who still make it to meetings, still show up to work, still post full-sentence updates on Reddit. But underneath all that structure, they're falling apart. And here's what makes it worse. Society often enables this. We look at cocaine as a party drug, a finance bro indulgence, a Wall Street badge of honor. Meanwhile, heroin? That's for alleyways and lost causes. But the reality? Both drugs destroy, just in different neighborhoods. Spontaneous Age wrote about this, too. He noticed how people on Reddit were telling others to try cocaine instead of heroin, as if one were cleaner, safer, more civilized. "I've seen people OD on coke," he wrote, "but because it's socially accepted among the rich, people act like it's manageable." He was right. Addiction doesn't respect class, or IQ, or social status. It doesn't care if you snort it in a bathroom stall or inject it in a luxury condo. It only cares that you keep coming back. And he did. Again and again, until there was no illusion left. Eventually, his posts were no longer experiments. They were breakdowns, sweat-soaked, sleepless, confused confessions, still articulate, but now haunted. The illusion was gone, and what remained was the raw truth of what heroin and cocaine had taken from him. Not just his health, not just his relationship, but his belief in his own invincibility. And maybe that's what scared him most. Because when the myth of self-control shatters, there's nothing left to protect you from what you've become. No education, no research, no well-phrased Reddit post. Just the silence, and the shaking. And now, we move to something even stranger. Because if heroin eroded a man's soul piece by piece, our next story is about a man who gave up a piece of his body, on purpose. Not to save himself, but to taste what should never be tasted. Let's talk about the man who cooked and ate his own leg. If heroin is the promise of warmth, then withdrawal is what happens when that warmth is ripped away, violently. Suddenly, and without mercy. Movies don't show this part. Or if they do, they make it cinematic. Sweat, maybe a scream or two, some shaking, a dramatic montage. But that's not what it's like. Not really. Withdrawal isn't a scene, it's a sentence. And Spontaneous Age lived every word of it. In his posts, he described it like this: "I'm throwing up, I'm sweating buckets, I'm shivering so hard my teeth hurt. I can't tell if I've slept or just blacked out. I want to crawl out of my own skin." It's easy to read those lines and skim past them. But pause. Really hear that last one. I want to crawl out of my own skin. That's not metaphor. That's the kind of thing your body screams when your soul doesn't feel like it fits anymore. When your bones ache, when your muscles twist, when you can feel your heartbeat pounding in places that shouldn't even have nerves. Withdrawal isn't just uncomfortable, it's devastatingly physical. Imagine the worst flu you've ever had. Now crank it up. Add tremors, anxiety, body convulsions, depression so sharp it cuts your will to live. Add hallucinations, insomnia, legs that won't stop kicking, eyes that won't stop crying. Your stomach is a war zone. Your brain is a traitor. Every second feels like an hour. And worst of all, you know exactly how to make it stop. One more hit. That's it. One tiny bag and this hell disappears. That's what makes opiate withdrawal so dangerous. It doesn't just hurt. It offers an escape. And that escape is the very thing trying to kill you. Spontaneous Age went through all of it. I slept for 30 hours straight. I soaked my mattress in sweat. I finally took a crap after a week, and it felt like victory. "I can do this," he wrote. "I don't need I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He was bargaining. And that's part of the process too. Denial, hope, collapse, repeat. One post would say he was clean, that he felt strong, that he flushed everything. The next, he was nodding off again. High at 4 a.m., back in the cycle. Too exhausted to reply to comments. The screen is a blur. My body hurts. I just want to sleep without sweating through my sheets. Some people questioned him, accused him of lying, of faking, because he was still posting with punctuation, still using full sentences, as if pain only counts when it's incoherent. But real withdrawal doesn't look like a movie meltdown. It's slow, drawn out, sometimes quiet, sometimes numb, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because you can be dying on the inside, and still sound completely composed online. Spontaneous Age was documenting a war inside his body. A war he was losing. And we were watching from a safe distance. Not helping, not intervening, just watching. And there's something deeply haunting about that. He wasn't the first to go through it. And he won't be the last. Because every week, thousands of people search the same thing. How to get through heroin withdrawal at home. They're looking for tips, for hacks, for shortcuts through hell. And sometimes, they find Reddit. Not a hotline, not a doctor, not a rehab center. A thread, a blinking cursor, and a chorus of strangers saying, "Hang in there. It's not nothing, but it's not enough." Because withdrawal isn't just a physical purge. It's a moment of truth. When everything fake falls away. And all that's left is the craving. The screaming silence in your head. The itch under your skin. The terrible, terrifying clarity that if you give in just once more, you'll feel okay. For a little while. Until it starts again. And that's the truth nobody wants to hear. Not everyone makes it through detox. Not because their heart stops. But because they choose the pain they know, over the pain that never ends. And now, we pivot. From the pain of withdrawal. To something even more taboo. Not just a body being broken, but a body being cooked. Because what happens when the horror isn't accidental? When someone doesn't lose control, but chooses it? Let's talk about the man who served his own leg for dinner. Narcotics Anonymous meetings usually happen in quiet church basements. The coffee is always bitter. The chairs squeak. There's a folding table somewhere in the room with little pamphlets that say things like, "One day at a time." But for Spontaneous Age, his NA meeting didn't have any of that. No circle of strangers. No sponsor. No coffee. Just a glowing screen, and the Reddit homepage. Because when your world starts collapsing, and you don't know where else to turn, Reddit is always open. And strangely, sometimes, that's enough. At least, at first, when he began posting about his withdrawal, about his failed attempts to quit, about the times he flushed his stash and the times he didn't, something started happening in the comment sections. People showed up. Not trolls, not haters, not lurkers, but addicts. Real ones. They recognized the tone. The rhythm, the chaos, they saw themselves in him. One user wrote, "You sound like I did on my third relapse. The way you're rationalizing the high? I did that too. Just know it doesn't stop. It never stops. You're not special. You're just early." Another said, "Get out now. I lost my kids before I realized it was too late." These weren't just comments. They were confessions, warnings, little digital sponsor notes tucked into the margins of his posts. It didn't take long before his threads started looking less like AMAs and more like group therapy. People shared relapse stories, talked about rehab, recommended Suboxone clinics, posted links to resources, helplines, NA locations. It was messy, imperfect, and strangely beautiful. For a moment, Reddit became something else. Not a social media site, not a debate arena, but a kind of digital fire pit. Where broken people gathered to warm their hands on someone else's pain. And for a while, it helped. Spontaneous Age even said as much. "I know some of you think I'm a troll, but this thread? It's saving me." And that's the thing. Because when your entire world feels like it's caving in, sometimes a stranger saying, "Me too," is the only thing that keeps you breathing. But even then, something was missing. Reddit could listen. It could offer advice. It could nod along with your spiral. But it couldn't make you go to a meeting. It couldn't hide your keys when you wanted to use again. It couldn't hug you when your girlfriend left. Or walk you to the hospital when you overdosed. It was support, but with no arms. Compassion, but without consequence. And slowly, Spontaneous Age started to realize that His posts became more chaotic, more raw, less about documenting, and more about crying out. I wish I was trolling. I wish this wasn't real. But I can't stop crying. I'm not sure if I want to live anymore. And even then, people kept replying, trying, reaching, typing into the dark, hoping their words would land before it was too late. But that's the limit of anonymous empathy. You can talk, you can scream, you can beg for help, but no one can knock on your door. Reddit became his unofficial sponsor, but it could never be his lifeline. And that's what makes this part of his story so haunting. Because we, the readers, the lurkers, the commenters, were part of it. We were in that thread, watching it all unfold. Some of us offered advice, some just read silently, but we were there. And still, he kept using. Reddit didn't stop him. It couldn't. Because no comment, no karma, no gold badge has the power to break the cycle if you're still inside it. That has to come from something deeper. Something real. Eventually, spontaneous age disappeared. The thread went quiet. People moved on. And that's what Reddit does best, move on. But for the people still stuck in that cycle, for the ones still typing into subreddits at 3 a.m. with tears in their eyes, Reddit feels like a meeting. Until it doesn't. Until the screen goes dark. And you're still alone. Which brings us to something even harder to talk about. Because if Reddit became his sponsor, it also became his stage. And like all performers, at some point, spontaneous age had to ask himself a question. Was he sharing his pain to heal? Or to be seen? And that's what we'll explore next. Because in this story, the audience doesn't just watch the collapse. Sometimes, they enable it. The thread went dark. No replies. No new updates. No AMA. Just silence. For a long time, people assumed the worst. That he had overdosed. That he'd disappeared. That like so many other anonymous souls swallowed by addiction, he had simply vanished between one high and the next. And for 7 years, that assumption held. 7 years of Reddit threads frozen in time. 7 years of users stumbling across his story like internet archaeologists, digging through broken sentences and blurry pictures, wondering if they were reading the final words of a dead man. And then, one post, buried quietly in the same old account. I don't know if anyone remembers me, but I'm almost 6 years clean now. Life is good. No fanfare. No poetic comeback. Just a few paragraphs. Simple. Plain. He hadn't been back to Reddit in years. He said, the messages were overwhelming. The story too painful to read. He didn't even remember what he had written back then. He wasn't ready to look. But he remembered the pain. And he remembered the people who helped. To anyone who reached out during that time, you helped me more than you know. It's strange, isn't it? After everything, the overdoses, the psych ward, the shaking nights on bathroom floors, it all ends. Here, with a quiet return, a moment of reflection, a pulse in the thread to say, I'm still here. But here's the question, was this redemption? Or just survival? Because recovery doesn't come with fireworks. No slow motion triumph, no end credits music, no big speech, just days, stacked on days, stacked on days. He says he's doing well now. That life is good, that he's clean, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the victory. Not a grand transformation, but stillness. Not perfection, but presence. He also admitted something else, something that stuck with me. If my life had really been okay back then, I wouldn't have tried heroin in the first place. That line changes everything, because it tells you the real story didn't start with the needle. It started before that, with the emptiness, with the quiet dissatisfaction, with the whisper that something was missing, even when everything looked fine on the outside. That's the part most people skip. We only see the fall. We miss the moment someone looks down. He was never trying to die. He was trying to feel. To wake up. To live a little harder. Even if it meant flirting with death. And isn't that what's so terrifying? That the distance between a clean, stable life and total collapse is often just one bored afternoon. Just one, what if? Just one, I've got this under control. He didn't post again after that final update. At least, not publicly. Not under that name. Maybe he's living a quiet life now. Maybe he's a counselor, or a dad, or someone who drinks too much coffee but never touches a needle again. Or maybe, he still checks that old account once in a while. Just to remember what the bottom looked like. Whatever the case, he lived. And in stories like this, That alone is a miracle. But what haunts me most isn't the redemption. It's the echo. Because for every spontaneous age that makes it out, there are others still typing, still spiraling, still waiting for a reply from the void. And as we leave his story behind, we step into another one. One stranger, shorter, quieter, but far more disturbing. Because not all unravelings are slow. Some people don't collapse in public. Some people do something far stranger and never feel shame at all. Let's talk about the man who loved a roach and called her his wife. Let me ask you something strange. And I mean really strange. If a piece of your body had to be removed, let's say a leg, would you want it back? And if you could get it back, would you ever be curious enough to eat it? Because that's exactly what one Redditor did. No drugs, no breakdown, just curiosity, and a question he couldn't shake. He went by the username Incredibly Shiny Shart, a name that sounds like a joke. But what he did wasn't funny. 2 years before the post, he had been in a serious motorcycle accident. His foot was destroyed. The doctors tried to save it, but eventually, he made the choice, amputation. But before the procedure, he made a request. He asked to keep the amputated leg. And legally, the doctors had to say yes. He signed the papers. They handed it over. And what did he do with it? He called up his friends and invited them to a dinner party. Hey, he said, I have something very special planned. He didn't tell them at first. He just served tacos, sautéed with onions, garlic, wine, simmered slowly, carefully, tender cuts of meat from his own calf muscle, specifically, the tibialis anterior. And yes, there are photos. No, we're not showing them, but they're real. 10 friends showed up. Only a few ate. They were curious, nervous, giggling. One of them asked, "Is this legal?" It was. In fact, this is what makes the story more disturbing. It was completely consensual. The leg was his. The meat was clean. The diners agreed. There was no crime. Just a question. What does human taste like? And according to him, like buffalo, but chewier, beefy, not too fatty. Now here's where things get blurry. Because on Reddit, he didn't sound unwell. He wasn't unhinged. He was articulate, calm, even funny. He answered people's questions openly. Did it feel wrong? Someone asked. Not really, he replied. It was from a healthy part of the leg. I'm a healthy person. Waste not, want not. He called it a once-in-a-lifetime experience. An experiment, a moment of bonding. And maybe that's what makes this story so deeply unsettling. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a psychotic break. It was a choice. Cold, logical, voluntary. That's not horror in the traditional sense. That's existential horror. The kind that whispers, there are people walking among us who make peace with taboos most of us never dare to touch. And they don't do it for survival. They do it for curiosity. Now, cannibalism has always haunted the human imagination. It's the oldest taboo. Older than murder. Older than theft. Even in our most desperate moments, shipwrecks, starvation, war, it's always been the final line. The thing you only do when death is closer than shame. But this wasn't desperation. It was brunch. And that redefines the entire conversation. Because if someone eats their own body, with consent, with seasoning, is it wrong? There was no victim, no trauma, just meat, and memory. So now we're forced to ask, was this depraved? Or simply, free? Was it madness? Or was it a man unshackled from fear? And more disturbingly, how many people would try the same, if no one ever found out? The comment section was split. Some were horrified, some fascinated, some weirdly inspired. But one thing united them all. Nobody could look away. Because there's something magnetic about a person who walks toward the line and crosses it, smiling. And if you think this story was strange, wait until you hear about the man who found love, not just fascination, with a being no one else could see. She wasn't human. She wasn't real. And yet, he married her. Let's talk about Agatha, the imaginary cockroach wife. If eating your own leg is about testing the boundaries of the body, then this story is about what happens when the mind becomes the body. When imagination doesn't just run wild. It builds a home, furnishes it, and moves someone in. Meet the man who fell in love with a cockroach. Not a real one, not a pet, an imaginary, human-sized, intelligent cockroach named Agatha. And he didn't just love her. He married her. His story began years ago on Reddit, buried inside a post on r/Tifu, Today I f'd up. The title? Today I f'd up by admitting to my girlfriend that I pretend she is a giant cockroach during sex. And yes, it's as strange as it sounds. It started, according to him, when he read The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka in high school. You know the one, where the main character wakes up transformed into a massive insect. While most students read it as a metaphor for alienation and dehumanization, he read it as something else. Something arousing. At first, he imagined the character had been a woman. A kind, intelligent, roach-like woman who just needed love. And then, somewhere in his mind, this character became someone. A specific someone. Agatha. He described her in vivid detail. Tall, shiny, covered in a protective exoskeleton. Elegant, sensual, gentle. Over time, Agatha wasn't just a fantasy. She was a companion, a presence, an invisible partner who stayed with him through bad days, lonely nights, and every relationship he tried and failed to have. Eventually, he found a girlfriend, a real one, but during intimacy, he admitted he couldn't help it. He always imagined she was Agatha. 3 or 4 times, he tried not to, tried to see his girlfriend as herself. He couldn't, and when he told her the truth, she left, not out of cruelty, not even out of anger, but because she couldn't compete with a being that didn't exist. Now here's where most people would stop. Take a step back, seek help, try to understand why the fantasy had taken over. But he didn't do that. Instead, he leaned in. He married Agatha, in his living room, with vows, and a honeymoon to New Orleans. He knew she wasn't real. He wasn't delusional in the traditional sense. He just didn't care. She lives in my mind, he said, and our love is real, even if she isn't. 5 years later, he returned to Reddit, this time with an update. Today I f'd up by admitting to my coworkers that my wife is an imaginary giant roach. He had gotten too comfortable, too used to thinking of Agatha as his spouse. So one day, in casual conversation, he referred to my wife. And of course, people asked questions. He panicked, tried to explain, told them about Kafka, about Agatha, about the wedding. They thought he was joking, until they realized he wasn't. After that, everything changed. He became an office pariah. People stopped speaking to him. Social invitations vanished. Slack messages dried up. He had turned himself into that guy, the one who married a bug. But still, he didn't regret it. Even after being ghosted, humiliated, and called insane, he remained loyal. Agatha keeps me warm on the coldest nights, he wrote, and I don't care if no one else understands. And then, it got even darker. A year later, he posted again. Today I f'd up by telling my parents I'm married to an imaginary roach. They cried, not out of joy, not even out of sadness, but out of helplessness. They begged him to get help, threatened to cut him off financially, told him he wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving unless he started therapy. But to him, that felt like betrayal. They're just not ready to understand that entities can exist without physical form and share a mind. Now here's the chilling part. He wasn't violent. He wasn't unstable. He wasn't posting incoherent rants or conspiracy theories. He was calm, gentle, almost poetic. And maybe that's what makes it so eerie. Because how many people around you seem fine on the surface, but live in entirely different realities behind their eyes? The term for this kind of experience is objectum sexuality, a rare psychological phenomenon where individuals develop romantic or sexual feelings for objects or imagined beings. It's been studied. There are people who've fallen in love with buildings, bridges, fictional characters, pieces of furniture. And for most of us, that sounds absurd, funny, maybe even sad. But for them, it's not a joke. It's connection. In a world where real connection feels unreachable. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The man who married Agatha didn't do it for shock value. He did it because she filled a space no one else ever had. And that should make us pause. Because when someone chooses an imaginary roach over real love, the problem might not be the fantasy. It might be the loneliness. And that's a thread we'll pull in the next chapter. Because while Agatha never hurt anyone, there are stories where the delusion does turn dark. When love turns to obsession. And the internet fuels the fall. Let's talk about the danger of parasocial collapse. And how some of the loneliest people online become the most watched. There's a reason most people keep their private lives private. Not because they're ashamed, not always, but because they know something the internet often forgets. Once you let a fantasy out into the real world, you can't put it back. That's exactly what happened to the man who married Agatha, the imaginary, human-sized cockroach. We talked about how he lost his girlfriend, then his parents. But here's what truly unraveled everything. He brought Agatha to work. Not literally, of course. She didn't walk into the office on 6 legs and ask for a visitor badge. But one day, during the casual team lunch, he referred to her, accidentally, unconsciously. "Oh yeah, me and my wife love that show." The words just slipped out. Natural, easy, familiar. But his coworkers paused. They glanced at each other, confused. Because as far as anyone knew, he wasn't married, and what followed wasn't an outburst. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a confession. Over sandwiches and office banter, he told them the truth. About Agatha, about Kafka, about the imaginary wedding, the vows, the honeymoon. He expected them to laugh at first. He even hoped for it. Maybe it would soften the blow. But the room didn't laugh. It went quiet, and that silence? It never really ended. From that moment on, he wasn't just a colleague. He was a problem. Conversations dried up. People stopped making eye contact. Lunch invites disappeared. Slack messages became strictly professional. And the whispers started. "Did you hear? Is he okay? What if HR gets involved?" Eventually, someone did go to HR. But there was nothing they could do. He hadn't broken any rules. He hadn't hurt anyone. He hadn't said anything offensive. He had just told the truth. A truth no one wanted to know. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because in a world that screams, "Be yourself," there are still limits. Invisible lines that, when crossed, mark you forever. You can be quirky. You can be eccentric. You can be a little weird. But there's a point where weird becomes unacceptable. Where fantasy becomes threatening. Where honesty becomes career suicide. And that's what happened to him. He didn't lose his job. Not officially. But he lost everything that made the job livable. The camaraderie. The water cooler chats. The feeling that you're part of something. That you're normal. In his final update, he wrote, "I used to have friends here. Now no one speaks to me unless it's about work. I wish I hadn't said anything. I just wanted to share something personal." But they didn't see it as a story. They saw it as sickness. And here's where things get complicated. Because was he wrong to share? Maybe. Maybe not. But what's undeniable is this. The modern workplace still punishes emotional honesty. We encourage mental health awareness on corporate posters. We hand out stress ball keychains during Wellness Week. But when someone shares something truly personal, something that doesn't fit the script, we recoil. We label. We isolate. We back away slowly. Because it's easier to support mental health in theory than to sit beside it in the break room. And that's what happened here. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't unstable. He was just different. But sometimes, different is all it takes. And in that difference, he lost the final thread of normalcy. Community. So he went back to where he felt safe. Reddit. His journal. His imaginary wife. Because say what you will about Agatha, she never stopped listening. And now we shift. From the man who brought fantasy into reality, to the moment reality pushed back. Because up next is a deeper question. What happens when imaginary intimacy becomes a substitute for real human connection? And what happens when that fantasy isn't just personal, but shared? Let's talk about parasocial collapse and the dangerous closeness between strangers, spectators, and spirals online. We all have that one moment in life. The moment when a secret becomes too heavy to hold alone. You pace around your room, rehearsing the words. You imagine best-case scenarios, support, understanding, maybe even a tearful hug. You tell yourself they love you, they'll get it. But deep down, you know they won't. That was the energy behind the post titled, "Today I f'd up by telling my parents I'm married to an imaginary giant cockroach." It wasn't meant to be a punchline. It was his confession. And, to his credit, he didn't spring it on them out of nowhere. He had been working up to it for months. Dropping breadcrumbs, mentioning someone special, a very unique relationship, a companion who doesn't live the way others do. His parents thought it was a new girlfriend, or maybe a partner with a disability. Something unusual, but explainable. So when he finally sat them down, heart pounding, hands trembling, and said, "I want to introduce you to my wife, Agatha. She's an imaginary cockroach." They didn't laugh. They didn't yell. They just stared. His mom started crying first. Not the sharp kind, not anger, but the long, soft kind, like grief. His father didn't say a word, not for 5 full minutes. And then, finally, "You're sick. We need to get you help." They didn't ask about Agatha. They didn't ask why. They just asked where it went wrong. What trauma he hadn't told them about. What they'd missed as parents. But what terrified them most was that he was calm. He wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't manic. He didn't think Agatha was real. He just loved her anyway. "I know she isn't physical," he said, "but she loves me unconditionally. She's never judged me, never left, never disappointed me." And here's where the fracture formed. Because his parents couldn't understand why someone would choose to live in fantasy. They thought it was surrender. He saw it as sanctuary. They gave him an ultimatum. See a therapist, or stop mentioning Agatha. No more updates. No wedding photos. No anniversary dinners for one. He refused. "You're asking me to erase the only thing that's ever made me feel whole." So they did something they hadn't done in 30 years. They stopped speaking to their son. No calls. No birthday cards. No holiday visits. It wasn't rage. It was retreat. And maybe that's the cruelest cut of all. When love doesn't leave with a bang. It just closes the door quietly and doesn't open it again. The subreddit went quiet for a few weeks after that post. Then he returned. Not with regret. Not with apology. But with resolve. "She's all I have now. And that's enough." Some Redditors called him brave. Others called him delusional. But the truth lies somewhere in between. Because while it's easy to write this off as madness, there's a deeper, darker truth here. People will choose fantasy over rejection. They will cling to a dream, no matter how absurd. If the real world keeps showing them cold shoulders. Agatha may not have been real. But the pain of being unloved, unheard, unseen? That was real. That always is. And that's the part no one wants to admit. Sometimes, it's not the fantasy that drives people mad. It's the loneliness. So when his parents walked away, he didn't spiral. He just disappeared further into the only place he was still accepted. Reddit. A screen. A silent, blinking cursor where Agatha would always listen. But that raises a question that's not so easy to sit with. What happens when society abandons someone for being too strange, but offers no road back? We're about to find out. Because our next story follows someone who didn't retreat quietly. He didn't find peace in solitude. He found chaos in connection. It's time to explore one of the internet's eeriest phenomena. Parasocial collapse, when spectators become enablers. There's a strange thing that happens online. When someone bares their soul, we don't always look away. In fact, sometimes, we lean in, not out of cruelty, not always, but out of morbid fascination. Out of something we tell ourselves is concern, but feels suspiciously close to entertainment. Let's be honest, you've seen it too. A Redditor shares a deeply personal story. They're spiraling, posting raw thoughts at 3 a.m. You can feel the unraveling between the lines. And the comments flood in. Subscribing to this train wreck. Keep updating. This is wild. Can't wait to see where this goes. See where this goes. As if it's a TV show. Not someone's life. And the thing is, they do keep updating. Because the more broken the story, the more eyes it draws. And the more eyes it draws, the more the poster begins to perform. Not consciously at first, but over time, the pain becomes content. We saw it happen with the man who married the cockroach. We saw it happen with Spontaneous Age, the addict who chronicled his collapse like a serialized novel. But this isn't just about individuals anymore. It's about us, the audience. What are we doing when we upvote a breakdown? When we binge read someone's descent like a thriller? We don't offer real help. We offer engagement. And that engagement? It's addictive too. Some Redditors begin to live for it. For the validation, the attention, the illusion of connection. Thanks for listening. They post. Even though no one's really listening. They're reading, reacting, gasping, but not reaching in. It's like watching someone drown. And instead of throwing a rope, we pull out popcorn. And this isn't just a Reddit problem. It's everywhere. Live streamers having public mental health episodes. TikTokers crying into their phones while viewers send laughing emojis. Comment sections filled with people debating whether it's real or just really good content. Somewhere along the way, mental illness stopped being private pain and started becoming public performance. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. Sometimes, the people collapsing don't even realize they're performing. They're just trying to feel seen, to be heard, to scream into the void and hear something echo back. But the internet doesn't echo. It applauds. And when the applause fades, when the thread goes cold, when the views slow down, when no one asks, "Are you okay?" anymore, that's when the real silence hits. That's when it stops being a story and becomes a tragedy. Because at the core of every Reddit post that spirals into spectacle, there's often a simple, devastating truth. I didn't know who else to tell. So they told the internet. And the internet listened, but it didn't care. And maybe that's the difference. Caring is quiet, slow, unseen. Spectating is loud, addictive, endless. So the question becomes, are we helping, or are we watching? And if we're just watching, how long until someone performs something they can't come back from? In the next part, we'll explore a case where that line vanished completely. Where one Redditor didn't just collapse in front of an audience. He dragged the audience into the collapse. You've never met them. You've never heard their voice. You wouldn't recognize them if they walked right past you on the street. But still, you care. You refresh their page. You check their updates. You worry when they go quiet. You smile when they sound okay again. You don't know them, but you feel like you do. That is a parasocial bond. A one-sided connection between you and someone who doesn't even know you exist. And online, it happens all the time. We're used to hearing about parasocial relationships in the context of celebrities, streamers, YouTubers. But Reddit has a quieter version. More intimate, more dangerous. Because Redditors aren't polished. They're raw. They don't come with makeup and stage lighting. They come with insomnia, with heartbreak, with intrusive thoughts typed out at 2:47 a.m. and posted into a thread titled, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." And when you read enough of those, something shifts. You start feeling for them, worrying about them, imagining their world. And somewhere along the line, without meaning to, you start treating their survival like your responsibility. Don't do anything stupid. Man, we're rooting for you. You've got this. One day at a time. I check your posts every morning. Stay strong. At first, it feels noble, human, kind. But then something strange happens. If they slip, if they relapse, spiral, disappear, you feel betrayed. Like they owed you something. They didn't. But you gave so much of your attention, your hope, your emotional investment. You start expecting a return. And when that return is silence, or worse, tragedy, it cuts. It hurts. You grieve someone you've never spoken to. You mourn a stranger. And maybe that's the scariest part. These parasocial collapses don't just harm the poster. They wound the audience, too. Because now you're carrying a ghost. Someone whose story you followed like a series. But whose finale left you staring at a screen, whispering, "No, please, no." You search their username. You look for any new comments. Any sign that maybe, just maybe, they're still alive, still out there. But the account is deleted. The trail has gone cold. And you're left holding a thread that no longer leads anywhere. This isn't fiction. This happens every single day. When the boy posting about his heroin detox stops replying. When the girl chronicling her eating disorder disappears mid-thread. When the man sharing his delusions of a cockroach wife suddenly goes quiet. These aren't characters. They're people. And yet we treat their unraveling like content. We tune in. We comment. We engage. But we don't reach out. Because we can't. There's no real bridge between us. Only fiber optic cables and usernames. And in that disconnection, something breaks. Parasocial collapse is the silent scream of the internet age. It's watching someone bleed out emotionally. And realizing you're only a spectator, never a lifeline. And that realization? That aching helplessness? It stays with you. You start questioning, why did I care so much? Was it real? Or was I just filling some hole inside myself? And worse, you wonder if they ever knew. If, in their final moments of posting, they understood how many strangers were out there. Watching, hoping, breaking a little inside too. But the internet doesn't offer closure. Only silence. Only empty profiles and unanswered questions. Which leads us to our next story. One that shattered even the illusion of distance. Because in the next case, it wasn't just emotional fallout. It was real-life death and real-life blame. Let's talk about the terrifying gray zone between accountability and anonymity. Once upon a time, people gathered around campfires. They told stories of monsters in the woods, of gods watching from the stars, of men who defied fate and lost everything. Stories passed down not just to entertain, but to warn. They weren't just tales, they were mirrors. And now? Now we don't need firewood or smoke to gather. We have screens, threads, upvotes, and Reddit, whether it meant to or not, has become a kind of digital campfire. It's where we go to confess, to laugh, to witness, to unravel. Scroll through our confession, our nosleep, our ask Reddit, and you'll see it. Modern mythology in real time. A man feeds his friends his own amputated leg. Another marries an imaginary roach. Someone else documents their battle with addiction post by post. Like Odysseus facing sirens in a syringe. These stories get shared, remixed, retold. Remember that guy who I read this post once about? There was this girl who disappeared after saying. And just like that, they become lore. We don't know if every detail is real. But that doesn't matter. Because truth is no longer the currency. Impact is. What did it make you feel? What did it awaken in you? That's the new standard. Emotion over evidence. Imprint over accuracy. Just like myths of old. In ancient times, stories warned of hubris. Today, Reddit warns us of something else. Isolation. Obsession. Digital descent. It's a platform, yes, but it's also an archive. A library of modern fables. Where the gods are usernames. And the monsters are inside our own heads. And we are the listeners. Clicking, scrolling, commenting, building digital shrines to people we've never met. Lighting candles with our upvotes. Spinning tales with our speculation. This isn't just social media. It's oral tradition with a keyboard. And in that sense, Spontaneous Age isn't just a user. He's a mythic figure now. The addict who let the whole world watch. The anti-hero who flirted with death and came back to post about it. The man who turned relapse into ritual and Reddit into redemption. But remember, myths always come with a cost. There is always something, or someone, sacrificed. And that brings us to the edge of our journey. Because if Reddit is our new campfire, and these stories are our new legends, what does that make us? The listeners? The archivists? The silent priests to a strange new pantheon? Or are we just addicts of a different kind? Hooked on stories that leave us colder than we began? In the next and final part, we'll ask the hardest question of all. Are we helping the storytellers? Or are we simply feasting on their pain? Stay with me. Let's finish this where all campfires end. In the ashes. With the ghosts. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Does it really matter if the story was true? If someone told you they ate their own leg, or married a roach, or relapsed on heroin in real time, and then, months later, admitted it was fiction, would it undo what you felt? Would it undo the lump in your throat? The disgust in your gut? The empathy you poured into the void? This is the strange purgatory of Reddit, where fact and fiction shake hands in the dark. On the surface, Reddit feels raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. But once you've been there long enough, you begin to notice cracks. Users who vanish mid-arc. Details that shift across posts. Addicts with perfect grammar. Suicidal cries written like screenplays. And soon, a darker question creeps in. What if they're just making it up? It's not paranoia. It's happened before. Redditors have staged elaborate stories. Faking illnesses, deaths, crimes, recoveries, and raking in karma, awards, and applause. And when they're exposed, it's chaos. Comment sections erupt. Betrayal floods the feed. People mourn the lie more than the loss. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Sometimes, even after it's proven false, people keep believing. It felt real. Even if it wasn't true, it meant something to me. The lesson still stands. Because the line between real and resonant is blurring. It's not just about what happened. It's about how it made you feel. And in a world where everything is content, where trauma is currency, and confession is a performance, we begin to commodify suffering. Real pain gets upvoted, fake pain gets monetized, and soon, you can't tell the difference. So what happens to actual people crying out for help? They get lost in the noise. Doubted. Dismissed. Because for every true cry for help, there are 100 well-written lies. It's the boy who cried Reddit. And now, nobody knows who to trust. You start to second-guess your empathy. You wonder if you're just being emotionally catfished. You become numb. And that numbness is the true danger. Because when we can't tell what's real anymore, we stop caring altogether. We scroll past genuine agony. Assuming it's bait, we let someone's last post fade into the algorithm. Because we're tired of being fooled. This is the price of credibility collapse. And it's not theoretical. It's happening now. But there's a deeper layer still. A question that haunts every lurker, every reader, every empath who's ever been burned. Why do I keep coming back? If the stories might be fake. If the pain might be staged. If I've been tricked before. Why am I still here? Watching? And that leads us to the final part of our journey. Not about the posters. Not about the stories. But about us. About the quiet hunger that keeps us scrolling. Even when we know the fire might burn us again. Let's turn the lens inward. Let me ask you something you probably don't want to answer. Have you ever read one of those Reddit posts? The breakdowns, the spirals, the midnight confessions, and felt a chill not because it was foreign, but because it felt familiar? Because beneath the usernames and typos and drug-fueled grammar, you caught a glimpse of something you've tried to bury? Something that sounded just a little too much like you? You see, the scariest part of these stories isn't how extreme they are. It's how close they sit to ordinary life. A bad week, a broken heart, a prescription refilled too many times, a job lost, a friend who didn't call back. That's all it takes. Not a monster, not a villain, just life, with its sharp edges and quiet erosion. And when you read about someone like Spontaneous Age, you don't just see a heroin addict on a downward spiral. You see someone who was once just lonely. Someone who logged on, wrote a post, waited for strangers to respond. And when they did, he wrote another, and another, until this place, this cold, blinking screen, became the only voice that mattered. That's not insane. That's not rare. That's human. Because in a world where we're more connected than ever, we're starving for real connection. We crave understanding, validation, a voice in the dark that says, I hear you. And sometimes, Reddit gives that, but sometimes, it gives just enough to keep us coming back. Without ever truly saving us. That's the trap. The mirror doesn't save you. It just shows you what you are, or what you're becoming. And if you stare too long, you might not like what's staring back. So maybe that's why we're drawn to these stories. Not just for shock, not just for spectacle, but because they whisper a terrible truth. You're not so different. You're not so safe. And deep down, we already knew that. We watch because we're hoping the story ends better than our own fears predict. We want to believe that someone can crawl out. That maybe we could too. But here's the twist. These aren't just stories. They're caution signs. Digital fables. Flashing red lights saying, this is the edge. Be careful how far you lean. So tonight, maybe log off a little earlier. Maybe call someone instead of posting. Maybe close the thread and open the window. Because while it's comforting to see pieces of ourselves in others, it's dangerous to lose yourself in their reflection. And if you ever find yourself typing something at 2 a.m., hand shaking, heart pounding, eyes burning from the screen, just remember, you don't need a subreddit to be heard. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is whisper your story to someone who already knows your name. Let the screen fade to black here. Let silence do what the internet never can. Let the viewer sit with the one question that still lingers. If this was me, who would be watching? So now we've reached the end. The final scroll. The last post. The quiet after the scream. You've heard about heroin and hallucinations. About leg meat and imaginary lovers. About people unraveling, not in private, but on a glowing screen, with thousands silently watching. But here's the thing no one tells you about stories like these. They don't leave when the screen goes dark. They stay with you, in the odd quiet before bed. In that moment you catch your own reflection and wonder, how close have I come to my own breakdown thread? Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because you're human. Reddit isn't a horror movie. It's a mirror maze. One post after another showing us what we could become, or what we've already survived. Some stories made us laugh nervously. Others made our stomachs twist. A few made us want to close the app and take a walk. But the stories that matter most? They're the ones that whisper. That could have been me. That almost was me. That still might be me. And if you're feeling that now, good. It means you still care. It means the numbness hasn't won. It means you haven't stopped feeling for strangers. Or for yourself. Maybe that's the real value of these confessions. Not just the shock. Not just the voyeurism. But the reminder that behind every username, every unhinged post, every upvote on someone's darkest day, there's a person reaching out, hoping someone sees them. You saw them. And now you carry that thread with you, tucked away in your mind, somewhere between curiosity and compassion. You don't need to tie a bow on these stories. They weren't built for clean endings. They're messy. They bleed into real life. But if you take anything with you, let it be this. Next time you see a post that looks too bizarre to be true, pause. Not because it might be fake, but because it might not be. And that person on the other side? They might be waiting for someone just like you to say, I hear you. I believe you. You're not alone. Thank you for watching.